Hello, and welcome to Independent Film Festival Boston. My name is Tess Marney, and I'm really excited to be here to moderate our shorts package conversation today. We'll be talking through shorts Fairfield today. So please help me in welcoming our filmmakers. Full house today, very excited about this. Thank you all for joining to have this conversation. Just to get started, I think it would be really great to kind of have each of you introduce yourselves and your films and the role that you played within your films. Let me start with Jeff.
All right. Hey, my name is Jeff Stern. My film is This Fog. I was the writer, director, editor.
I'm Stephen Ross. My film was Balls, and I was the writer, director, editor as well.
My name is Kevin P. Alexander. I am the writer-director of Boys and Toys.
I'm Luke Jarvis. I was the co-writer and director of the short Rope-a-Dope.
I'm Jacob Halpren. I'm the writer, director, and co-editor of Claire at 7 Months.
Very exciting. Very exciting. So, really excited. We have representation from almost all the films here today. So something that I would love to understand is how each of you got started on this project and kind of did it end up where you expected it to be when you started the writing process?
I'll start. I'll go first. The short that we shot was actually a more professional version of a short that we had done a couple years ago. I grew up in the Boston area and then lived in New York for a long time and then moved back to Boston a couple years ago. And the first thing I did to sort of get my feet wet from a filmmaking standpoint was shoot a little short on my cell phone with some local comedians here. And what we made, we were really happy with, but it had the production values of something that you shot on a cell phone. So we had always sort of fantasized about doing a more legit version. We finally scraped together the money and the time to do that. So it was a new experience for me because it was actually something that would essentially already written and we were kind of adapting ourselves, which isn't ever how I've worked before. And it mostly turned out how I expected. It had a little bit, I guess, of almost like an uncanny valley feeling of you're trying to recapture something you already did. And that felt a little strange, actually. I'm not sure that I would try that again. But for the most part, it turned out how we expected and kind of how it had the first time. From the process of writing to the edit, it felt like we were realizing what we first imagined, which was good.
I guess I could go straight into probably nobody else here knows, but Jake and I actually co-wrote and co-directed a short that played at Boston a few years ago. And we really enjoyed that process. But then afterwards, we kind of started writing together again, and we're thinking about ideas that we could kind of take on ourselves and kind of maybe help each other out a little bit more in terms of just like talking about the big picture stuff, but handle it on our own for our individual projects. So after we did that one, we each went off and kind of leaned into maybe aspects of the original project that we liked. And so I took some of those elements and went my way, and he took some of those and went his, and kind of cool to see how that kind of separated itself out into two kind of distinctly different, but from the same source kind of projects.
Yeah, I mean, I can follow that. Yeah, we had made a short with Emily, the lead, and Claire, and Drew, the lead, in Stephen's film Balls. And it was interesting to see where they came from and where they went. I had always wanted to get out of New York City and make something in my hometown in Florida, where I had like specific places and spaces in mind. So this kind of beach-centric narrative grew around that, and always writing for Emily, and just kind of like expanded from there.
So my film is totally different than the film that I set out to make. I mean, my film it's about life during the pandemic, but the film was shot in September of 2019. So it's footage that was shot pre-pandemic. And to be totally honest, the film that I set out to shoot was not going to be good. I was basically an excuse I wanted to do two things. I wanted to experiment with dance choreography, and I had access to a fog machine. And that was, I was like, well, we'll figure something out. So I shot a bunch of stuff, and I was in the middle of editing it in like early March of 2020. Obviously, COVID hit, and I really didn't touch it again until maybe the summer or fall of 2020. And at that point, I'd been writing, kind of just collecting thoughts about life during COVID. And I had all this like interesting fog footage, which felt like it fit really well with the idea of like, you can't breathe the air, and so I just kind of retrofitted my footage into this new idea. And I'm much happier with the result than I think whatever it was that I was making originally.
I wrote, it was originally based on a feature I wrote a couple of years ago, and I decided I didn't like it and then just scrapped what was based on the feature and rewrote it just with the very, very base premise of the feature, but created completely different characters and scenarios. So yeah, ultimately shot it 2 years later, and it was more or less, the short that we set out to shoot.
Very cool. There was a lot of physicality across a number of the films, be it dancing, boxing, kind of the physical comedy at times, particularly in Boys and Toys. How did you approach capturing some of that physicality as you were going through your process?
I was kind of worried about it, actually. I was sweating about whether we needed to hire a stunt person or not. Obviously, it's like low budget, and it's like you can't have like an amateur stunt person. It's like you either have a stunt person or not. And finally, we're just like, we'll do it. Everyone's game. And luckily, it all turned out fine with the driving and the falling and all the other stuff. But it was definitely new for me, and I was probably more worried about that than any other aspect of the film, was the physical stuff.
Was she okay in any of her falls? Were there any issues?
No, she had bandage around her, and we had, mattresses and stuff. PAs can be good stunt people too.
Nice.
All the prep and everything. She was not hurt.
That's right.
Yeah, with our project, Drew Cooper, who's the actor who plays kind of the big Jack guy, he does like stunt-based work in local movies. Like he was in Equalizer 2. He was in one of the Purge movies, kind of doing that kind of stuff. So he has some experience, and he essentially served as like our stunt coordinator. We definitely worked out all of the fighting and all that very detailed in advance, kind of a combination of ideas we had with his expertise of how to fake punches convincingly. And similar to Kevin, I mean, I was very nervous about it basically until we were done shooting it. But fortunately, everybody involved was game, and we kind of took our time to make sure we got it right.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have that much to deal with, but there was one moment where Drew had to hit Nick, I guess, in the balls, and I thought that would be kind of a simple. Can you just like fake that, but to get the right amount of energy and power without actually hurting him was a thing. So strangely, that ended up being like the thing that took the most time, is trying to get him to convincingly do that hit. But I didn't think that was going to be as big of a. It made me realize that if the stakes get much higher in terms of the physicality of things, that it's a big thing to figure out.
I didn't have much. It was kind of following a pregnant woman, just walking from A to B. But I guess Matt's karaoke performance, I kind of just gave him free reign to do what he wanted, and the results were great.
I have to say, I love that song much more than I used before I saw that scene. That was such an inspired choice of.
Great, I appreciate it. Thanks. I feel the same way about it. I had not thought about that song very much before I made this short. But yeah.
Were there other songs that you considered other than that song, or was it always that song?
Oh yeah. I had spent like an embarrassing amount of time going down like playlists of like 90s and early aughts like radio hits, but that one was just kind of a happy accident too, because like the lullaby version of that with the "Ooh Baby" line just works so well. But I knew I always wanted like her to have this big cathartic release to this like song that wasn't inherently emotional. Like I thought the response would be that much more powerful. So that kind of walked the line perfectly.
Very cool. And Jeff, how was it for you kind of filming the dance scenes?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the most challenging, but also the most successful kind of stunt choreography stuff was just working with small children. You know, I seem to set myself up for that. Like I work with children repeatedly. I mean, they are admittedly often my own children, but I rope other kids into it too. And I tend to shoot in kind of a documentary style. So it's kind of like, okay, guys, take your towels and your blankets and just kind of like do battle with the fog, and we're going to shoot it really close to you in slow motion. And you know, you end up with 90% unusable stuff, but the stuff that's usable is pretty cool. So that I sort of take that documentary approach to stunt action stuff.
Very cool. Yeah. So when you guys are going through kind of that writing, directing, and then getting into that editing phase, you know, how are you approaching kind of morphing the story and the material as you're going across kind of the life cycle of a project?
I mean, for me, it was a really interesting process leading up to it because I was so weather dependent. And so I actually had two scripts, one being if it was completely covered in snow and another being if there was no snow. And those kind of going to dictate where the story went. And when we got there that day, the field was completely covered in snow. And then by lunchtime, it had completely melted and was a completely brown color. And so I kind of had to adapt in the moment to go with the other script idea, which was kind of the B script in some ways. And then also in the edit, I had to figure out what percentage of the footage from like the earlier part of the day would still fit into the later part of the day. And so that became a bit of like an editing puzzle. But yeah, the weather is, having a script dependent on weather is good to avoid if you can, I think.
I thought the soupy, kind of disgusting ground was perfect. I actually was wondering if that was like an intentional choice to wait for that kind of day.
It was not at first, but then when we got there and we realized how gross it was and just like the comedy that was in, just like, you know, the actors between takes, we were having to like put boards down so they wouldn't freak, because it was pretty cold. It was upstate New York. And so they were like standing on 2x4s and everybody was wet and it was just gross and terrible. And at first it was like, this is a worst case scenario. And then we were kind of like, but it is kind of funny. And so then we started leaning into that. And when the balls would splat in the mud, we were like, all right, that's good. We should shoot that more. So yeah, it was a little bit more kind of in the moment than I originally expected in that moment, in that regard.
Yeah, I think for mine, just because it was so physical, basically it was written very tightly kind of to how it had to be. There was a rhythm to so many of the beats that it didn't really adapt at all from the script to the shooting to the editing. It was just about sort of preserving that rhythm and making sure what we were shooting fit with the flow of what the script was. I guess that's the trade-off of doing something more physical, is you end up making choices earlier to make sure that it's sort of working the way that you're expecting it to.
Yeah, I always get depressed during editing. It's like really fun to shoot. The beginning of editing is great, the middle is awful, and then for me, at least by the end, it's like, all right, back up. Because when you start to see it over and over again, you're like, oh, that didn't work. You sort of focus on the things that you feel didn't work.
How did you handle your bar scene with all of the people? How did you go about shooting that with like the sound and everything?
Well, so we shot overnight at a bar. So that was like, they let us in Sunday night, and then we left, Monday morning, and we had about 10 or 12 extras, maybe.
It almost felt like more, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the idea.
Yeah.
I was super impressed with it. Yeah,
couldn't have been. Yeah, I think it was about 10 or 12. Might have been 15. And obviously, like all the sound and everything is post. Yeah. So yeah, it was just a matter of finding the right bar that we could do it in that would let us do it, and it's pretty easy to get extras in Brooklyn that'll just stay overnight and sit for 12 hours. Yeah, it was we got really lucky with that location.
What bar was that?
It's High Dive in Park Slope.
Okay.
It's actually 2 blocks from where I grew up, so we use my parents' house as holding sort of.
Oh, nice.
And I knew that bar because I had been there, growing up.
Yeah, I think I know that bar. I think right around the corner from there.
It's very red. It's like it's a bar that doesn't need any production design. It's just like, it's there. That's sort of You I feel like, because we don't have a production designer, you want to find sets that are already production designed, basically.
I think my bar scene was probably the production went pretty smoothly, but doing shooting in Florida, finding 10 to 12 extras in Florida was a little harder. Just to stay all day, and that was just like a full day shoot. So,
but that was a more low key vibe. The bar was supposed to be more low key.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the hardest part of the process for me was post production. It was, I think the first cut I had was 27 minutes, and the pacing just seemed far too long. And we ended up just like slowly trimming it. I kept wanting to be able to have her and Cody meet sooner. It was kind of like 8 minutes in, then 6 minutes in. And I think now it's like around 4.5 minutes, because that's when the film really takes off. But
did you cut like whole scenes or pieces of scenes early?
So Steven actually helped me out. There was a whole scene in the car when he goes to drive her home. They actually end up having this whole conversation, and I even felt on set it wasn't really working. And Steven was like, you should just totally cut it and just like have them sit in silence and then cut to her back in the motel. And it I don't know why I never thought of that before, because it's like the tension isn't released, so you're still kind of sitting in that, uncomfortable after karaoke scene. So that was the only scene that was like cut, but we ended up like, I guess, cutting 7 more minutes just from lines here and there throughout each scene.
Yeah, it has kind of an interesting, like it has kind of almost like an impressionistic start, which I liked. You're getting like these little snapshots, but it does take you a few minutes to kind of figure out where it's going, which worked for me, but it's an unconventional structure for a short.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I liked how it started slow, and you're like, where is this going? Oh, yeah. So.
Yeah, I think I'm drawn to the like films that kind of walk that line between, sad and weird, goofy comedy. So kind of wanting to keep the viewer guessing, like, oh, where is this weekend starting off in this like idyllic beach vacation, and then you end up on like some random dude's couch you sort of remember from high school. It's like the absurdity of it all. Like, how did we end up from A to V?
I really liked how you got to the high school guy. Like, at first she's sort of interested in the bartender, who is so not into her as soon as the like other girls come in.
Yeah.
You sort of see him out of the, he's kind of like out of focus, and like you bring him in. I thought that was really nicely set up.
Oh, thanks.
So what was the casting process like for all of you?
For ours, it was all people that mostly folks we'd worked with before. there's sort of a troupe of comedy-based people in Boston that I've worked with a lot for a few years. So the main characters were all written specifically for those people, with the exception of the bully character, the like high school bully. That was just we put out a casting call, and we're fortunate to find somebody we really liked. But the script was kind of tailored for the specific actors in our case in advance.
So I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and if you lived in Portsmouth, these are like the most famous people in my town. It's like city councilor, librarian, guy who's like he's a local drag queen who everybody knows. He hosts like a drag night. Like I kind of just went for like who are the most charismatic, recognizable people in my town who would be game for this. So when this shows in Portsmouth, it'll be very exciting for people.
Nice.
Very fun.
Yeah, for me, like we said earlier, I had worked with Drew before, and I thought he was just so naturally good and easy to work with that I wanted to keep that, but then introduce somebody new. And Nick Dodani had done some things that I had seen, and I thought he would be a really good kind of foil to Drew's personality. So I was able to get a casting director, kind of get him the script, and he ended up liking it, and we just kind of went with it. But yeah, it was cool to work with him because I wasn't sure if he would be on board or not.
And with Emily Althouse, from the film we made, we had a working relationship and friendship. And then with Matt Baratz, he was actually recommended from a comedy writer friend from the comedy world. And it seemed like he could bring something dynamic to the role of Cody while also maintaining a level of humor. And yeah, it was just like they met, I think, 2 days before we started shooting. So I just got really lucky with how great their chemistry was.
I worked with a great casting director that was recommended to me by an actor friend. And so everyone, the parents, I looked at reels, but the younger people came in and did reads. And I was ready to cancel it because we couldn't find a lead actress that we liked until like a week before. And I was like, okay, we'll do it. So that was an interesting process.
What was it like with the kind of age difference between those two? Was that, or is the age difference not as big as it seems?
No, it's about right. It wasn't weird because I mean, you know, he's been the younger guy he's been in a bunch of stuff. They got along really well. They seem to hit it off. I didn't want to make a big deal about it. But I you know, the first scene they actually did was when they're making out on the sidewalk. That was literally the first thing that we shot. So they hadn't even spoken to each other yet. I was just like, all right, make out. But they hadn't met each other before. But I just, in retrospect, I was like, oh, this is the first thing we're shooting is them making out. And we're not even really building up to it. Anyway.
Straight into testing the chemistry.
Go. Streets of New York.
Very cool. So it seems like most of your films were collaborative efforts, you know, other people kind of participating or helping in some capacity or another. How do you approach that collaboration process and kind of integrating either feedback or your own inputs back into different parts of the process?
I work with a lot of times the same producer and co-editor, and it's very important to bounce ideas off him. And I will say that the thing that I'm trying to get better at is, I don't know how other people feel, but obviously when you're doing a short, you're always pressed for time and you're just trying to get everything. And I always have to make a mental note to myself that always, you know, let the actors do their thing a few times before I jump in. Because because sometimes it's like we're quick and I'm like, no, this is how I was thinking about it. And I just need to remind myself to be like, because I'll often find the editing, the first couple of takes is like, oh no, they knew exactly what they wanted to do. I just didn't realize it yet. So that's sort of what I'm trying to learn more about collaboration.
I feel like I have a handful of people that I go to for feedback, Steven being one of them. And yeah, just I try not to send it out till I'm at a wall. Like, I try to do as much as I can and then wait to share to get feedback. But I ended up working with the cinematographer is a good friend of mine who also shot Martini Night. And yeah, it was actually a lot of the same crew members as well. So I felt comfortable on set, but I also felt myself going back to take 1 and 2. Kevin, as you were saying too, I was like, oh yeah, I'm just like in my head when I'm on set, but when I'm sitting at the computer and everything's like in control, oh yeah, take 1 and 2 were perfect. So I wasn't messing around. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, as you said, like obviously Jake and I kind of met each other in a more like editing phase. So we definitely look to each other for a lot of like editing help. I think I also have maybe I used to kind of go for more of like the documentary method of like shoot a ton of stuff and then whittle it all down. I'm not even sure if this is right or wrong, but I think that kind of what I've learned is that maybe try to really think about how long you want something to be before you go and shoot it. And then that way you can really kind of focus on the beats that you're getting. Cause yeah, I mean, we just spent a lot of time trying to do things that I didn't expect to take a long time. And then the things that were really important, we had to do quickly. And luckily, if you have good actors and good crew, then you can get it done. But yeah, focusing on less words on the page is sometimes better to do before you get into edit, I think.
Yeah, in terms of collaborators for us, again, I think writing it for the exact people. And then to me, it was really about like turning it over to them. Like once they have the script, making sure it's something they're comfortable with. And anytime, because these are guys that I trust, anytime they suggest maybe we should do it this way, or it would feel more natural if I said that, definitely being very open to that. I'm not precious about the exact dialogue or anything like that. And, making sure that if it feels authentic to them, they're going to give better performances. I think similar to some of the things these guys are saying, anytime I kind of like override and really sort of push and enforce, like, no, you should do it like this. Usually in the edit, it's like, no, they were right, or they never quite understood what I was saying or whatever. Make sure that I get it their way too, because that can feel much more, authentic if that's sort of what they're in tune with emotionally.
I would say I take a very experimental approach to production. I think I've made a couple of films this way now where I kind of know while I'm shooting it that I won't really know what the film is until I start editing it. So I have kind of like very specific images in mind, but I totally trust my cinematographer. Like I don't really hover over him much. I trust that he's going to get something better than what I would tell him to get. A lot of times, I've worked with him before, a guy named Adam Van Voorhees. And same thing, I worked with a choreographer. It was the same thing. It was like, Amanda, can you go work with these guys? I trust that you're going to come up with something. And so it's almost like, in some ways, I'm seeing it for the first time when we're shooting it, which I've learned to just be at peace with and not let that stress me out. And I tend to work with non-actors. So a lot of what I feel like I have to do as a director is make the experience kind of enjoyable and, sort of not make them think about the fact that we're filming them, so probably different than what everyone else is describing here.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we are kind of approaching the end of our time, unfortunately. I do, just to round us out though, I would love to hear kind of about, what's coming up next for all of you.
Who knows? No, I'd like to do another short at some point, but not sure yet. But been writing a lot during the pandemic.
I shot a feature during the pandemic with a few Boston folks, including Corey, who's the lead in Rope-a-Dope. I mean, obviously it was a very strange, kind of extenuating circumstances, but one benefit that we recognized was that we all had a lot of free time. So we shot kind of a on the fly, kind of low budget feature that I'm just editing now, but hopefully getting that out to the festival circuit soon.
Very cool.
I've been writing. It's been slow going. Learning to be less hard on myself with some of the free time. But I wrote something short that takes place in a parking lot, 2 people, 1 scene contained. I'd love to shoot while we kind of slowly wait for the world to open back up. So hopefully this summer. But something like quick on the cheap with friends on the weekend.
I've strangely kind of transitioned into a lot of documentary work. So I've finished up a short documentary that's in the festival thing now, and then I'm editing a documentary series, and then developing, kind of researching for a documentary feature right now. So I'm kind of deep in the documentary world, but hoping that I can get back into narrative before too long.
Cool.
I really enjoyed the, this was kind of a comedy block of shorts. I really enjoyed the stuff in this program, and I'm interested in doing something very different than what I've done in the past. And you guys were inspirational. So nice job with your with your work here.
Likewise.
Thanks, you too.
Likewise, yeah.
Awesome.
Was your song "In This Fog"? Did you write that, or did you know where did that song come from?
So I hired a guy to do that. I do this every time I fall into this trap. I used not a temp track. I mean, I used a song by the band Beach House as what I edited to, and I was like, well, I have to use this. This is perfect. Everything is perfectly edited to this, which is just like so short-sighted because I didn't have the rights to it. So I contacted Sub Pop, the label, and asked if I could use it, and they said no. So I basically hired this guy to he really just nailed the vibe and the tempo, and I mean down to the like half second. So I was really happy with the work he did.
That guitar riff, I could totally hear
Yeah, I mean, and it was great because it's his own original piece of music. We would never be accused of ripping the song off, but it's like he did such a great job because it perfectly captures the original piece.
Was that a Portsmouth guy or somebody you found some other way?
So I'll give him credit. His name is Pete Morse. He's from Portland, Maine. Yeah, really, really talented guy. And he did everything. He composed it, played all the instruments, mixed it, everything.
Very cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for the time today. The conversation was really fantastic. And for those of you watching, I hope that you'll continue to enjoy the festival.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I enjoyed it.